I think, Chick, I'd lived here long enough, lived here nearly 40 years to be able to say, okay, I'm going to write about this place now. I'm going to make a fictional world here. And because you're always a blow in, you're always an outsider, and maybe all novelists are always outsiders somewhere, no matter where they live. So I felt that, okay, I'm going to dare to try to write about this village. And for the first time, uh, well, maybe the last thing to say, the last tale of the history of the rain is, so my father, his job in life had been that he was the head of the Electricity Supply Company of Ireland, known as the ESB. So he was the head of that. So I grew up hearing stories about electricity. So in those books that he left that I talked about in History of the Rain, there was also some books about electricity. So one of which was about that's mentioned in the acknowledgements of that book of This Is Happiness about the rural electrification scheme in Ireland and the fact that electricity did not come to rural Ireland until the late 50s. So This Is Happiness is set in 1958. It's the year I was born. And so when we came here in 1985, it was shocking to both of us to hear stories. We lived with a whole lot of older people. We were the only young people, so our neighbors are all much older. And so to hear stories of someone telling you, oh, yes, I remember the day the electricity came and I came home from school and I was allowed to be the one to flick the pip on the wall to turn on the light. And it's just mind-boggling because, of course, in Dublin there was electricity many decades before that. But to think of that, there were people around who can remember electricity coming and remember life before electricity. And so it seems such a striking moment that I said I've got to try to write about that time and the period leading up to the coming of electricity. And what happened then was I created this village of Faha, which is also kind of mythic, kind of has some of those things that are from the Fall of Light world, some of that. But um, our experience in West Clare has been an experience of people being enormously helpful to us and being big-hearted and generous and kind, even in difficult circumstances. For years, we lived with no money whatsoever and relied a lot on our neighbors to help us in many ways, and they did. And they wanted us to succeed. And people say to me, could have an 8-year-old boy walking behind cattle, driving them along our little boreen road. And I would come out and he'd see me and he'd say, how's the writing going today, Niall? I'd say, good, Noel, it's going well. Good, writing books. Yeah, that's it. And so you are a part of it in a way. They wanted you to be successful and write the books and so on. So I've always felt that the community was an extraordinary one. Um, and I wanted to try and capture some of that in This Is Happiness. Um, while writing This Is Happiness, I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with it and I didn't want to finish writing that book. I thought, I could just keep writing this book. I could just go 10,000 pages, just stay with it, just stay here. So I finished the book eventually because I wanted to write a book that takes place between two raindrops. The one in the first pages of the book, the rain stops, and then the one at the last page when the rain starts again. So, that sentence, I was provoked by thinking, driving somewhere, I was thinking, we say once upon a time. Why do we say upon? Why do we say once in a time or during a time or just once there was? Why do you say once upon a time? And I began to think of that idea of it being outside slightly of time. It's inside the time of story. And that like little lift of it out of regular time, it's upon it, allows it sort of gives a license to the storyteller. And so I began to think of this in that sense of a fable as between two raindrops and a time, upon a time, this happened. And when I finished the novel and I began to get, it was published and I began to get these extraordinary um, emails from readers all over. Time and again, they would say, we didn't want the book to finish. We read the last 100 pages slower and slower and slower. We didn't want to finish it. And by that stage, I had already had that same experience in writing it. and knew that I was going to now try to stay in Faha and write a series of novels between the coming of electricity and the coming of the internet. And I'm gradually going to plot community, and some of the characters overlap and some don't, and new characters and so on, but to try and chart what happens in that last half of the 20th century in this village of Faha. The Time of the Child takes place 4 years after This Is Happiness. So it's the Christmas of 1962. So This Is Happiness was the summer of 1958. So electricity has been in the village for 4 years. There's some televisions. The first Irish television station has started the previous year, and we now have people watching Irish television and how that is. And it's the first time in some houses that the couch, the sofa, is not aimed to the fireplace, but aimed towards the television. Um, and it's that changing world. So it's the Christmas of 1962. It takes place over the weeks of Advent. It finishes on Christmas. So it's a Christmas novel to some extent in that it's its setting. And the central character is Dr. Troy, who was a secondary character, I think, to some extent in This Is Happiness. He had three daughters, the three beautiful daughters. And so we're with the doctor. And the reason, probably in hindsight, that we're with the doctor is the novel was begun during COVID. And I don't know how vividly you recall, but for me, it was an extraordinary moment, maybe unique in world history. Um, when in the early days of COVID in Europe, especially, we were watching it in Italy. It was coming up through Italy, and it was ravaging, and there were not even a sign yet of a vaccine, and we just thought it would just keep coming. And people were asked to go out and applaud healthcare workers on the front line, and at 6 o'clock in the evening to bang pots, make noise, and thank them because we couldn't thank them in person. And people did in London, in cities all over, coming out at a particularly given hour to just bang pots and clap and applaud for 1 minute health workers who were on the front line. And that made me think a lot about what it is to be a doctor in a parish where every single person is your patient and where you carry all their illnesses with you all the time. And for your point of view, the whole world is sick, which was the thing in COVID times. And so that certainly was a provoking spur moment. And then the second thing was that our daughter gave birth to our first grandchild, Esme, to whom the book is dedicated. And that was one of the most profound moments of my life in holding her and experiencing that sort of completion of a circle in a way. So they are the two things probably that dominate the novel: the birth of a child and a doctor, person dealing with medical situation.